There are moments in life when people walk away from you, moments filled with confusion, betrayal, and pain. And sometimes the very ones who inflicted the wound are the same ones who try to return to the scene of the damage. They come back, not because they've changed, but because your absence reveals something their presence never honored. You see, people don't always return because they love you. Sometimes they return because they finally recognize what they lost. But here is the deeper truth. They didn't just lose you, they lost access to the favor, the peace, the joy, and the purpose that was connected to your presence. When a man hurts you and walks away, heaven takes note. God is not idle in the face of your pain. He allows seasons of separation not to punish you, but to prepare you. Because sometimes people must lose your presence to understand your value. Some of you have cried over what left you, when heaven was rejoicing over what could no longer delay you. Men come back because the seed you planted in them continues to grow long after you stopped watering it. Your words, your love, your loyalty, it haunted them in places of silence. And they return not because they are worthy, but because they are hungry for something they now realize they did not deserve in the first place. But listen to me carefully. Not every return is divine. Some returns are tests, not blessings. Some doors God closed, and you're standing there holding the handle, trying to open what heaven has already locked. Don't confuse a man's return with God's endorsement. Not every prodigal needs a party. Some need to stay in the far country until they discover the value of what they left behind. The man who hurt you may come back, but the woman he left is not the same woman who stands here today. You have grown, you have healed, you have evolved. Pain taught you purpose. Rejection introduced you to revelation. And now you no longer accept visitors who don't value your presence. You must understand, when you carry light, those in darkness will try to come back to bask in what they once ignored. But you are not a rescue mission for the emotionally irresponsible. You are not a convenience for the inconsistent. You are a daughter of destiny, clothed in divine wisdom and designed for greatness. When a connection between two people is made at the soul level, it's not easily broken, even when the relationship ends in pain. A soul tie is not just emotional, it's spiritual. It's the unseen bond that forms through intimacy, shared secrets, mutual vulnerability, and spiritual exchange. When a man hurts you and leaves, that tie doesn't simply dissolve with his absence. His body may walk away, but his presence lingers. His voice echoes in your thoughts. His energy shadows your peace, and his influence can still pull on your emotions long after he's gone. The reason some men come back after causing damage is because the soul tie was never truly severed. They feel that pull too. There is something unfinished, an invisible thread that still connects them to you, especially when they can't find the same peace, loyalty, or depth elsewhere. Soul ties work both ways. They are not dependent on the morality of the relationship. They exist whether the bond was healthy or toxic. That's why even after betrayal, the offender may return, not because they are ready to do right, but because they are still bound to what they wronged. What they don't realize is that hurting you didn't cancel the connection. It complicated it. And in their absence, they start to feel the void. They sense a missing piece, not necessarily because they are repentant, but because the spiritual cord is still intact. And the more you heal, the more that tie becomes a source of conviction for them. They feel the weight of what they broke and the memory of what they had. The soul tie becomes a mirror, reflecting the best of what they lost and the worst of what they did. And so they come back, not out of love, but out of unfinished spiritual business. Guilt is not always immediate. Sometimes it sleeps quietly beneath the surface, hidden behind pride, denial, or distraction. But over time, it begins to stir. When a man walks away after hurting you, he may seem unaffected in the moment. He may carry on acting as though nothing happened, believing he was justified or convincing himself that you'll simply move on. But time has a way of exposing what ego tried to cover. Guilt is the alarm clock of the conscience. And when it rings, it demands attention. A man can silence his conscience for a while, but he cannot kill it. That still small voice begins to speak louder when the noise of life fades, when the replacements fail to satisfy, when the peace he expected never comes, when he sees the strength in you that he once overlooked. Guilt doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers in the quiet moments, in the middle of the night, in the spaces where your absence is deeply felt. It speaks not just of what he did wrong, but of who he failed to become when he had the chance to grow with you. This guilt isn't just emotional, it is spiritual. It comes from violating a divine law of love, honor, and truth. When a man damages what God called him to protect, heaven bears witness, and eventually so does his soul. Guilt awakens him to the reality of his actions and the consequences of his choices. It makes him revisit the moments he dismissed, the tears he ignored, the loyalty he took for granted. And sometimes, driven by that internal conviction, he returns. Not always because he wants reconciliation, but because he seeks relief. He wants to silence the guilt, to see if you've moved on, or to find redemption in your forgiveness. But guilt is not transformation. It is only the beginning of awareness. When a man walks away from a woman who carries true inner light, grace, wisdom, strength, and dignity, he may leave thinking he's walking into something better, easier, or more exciting. But what he often doesn't realize is that he's not just leaving a person, he's leaving a presence, a divine atmosphere, a covering of favor, the kind of light that doesn't just brighten a room, but changes the entire climate of someone's life. And while he may take that light for granted in the moment, its absence becomes undeniable once he's out in the cold. The light you carry is not something he gave you. It is something God placed in you. It is the result of your character, your love, your resilience, and your faith. And when you chose to walk away, that light didn't dim. It didn't fade. It kept shining. In fact, in many cases, it grew brighter. Because the absence of someone who mishandled you often becomes the catalyst for you to rise higher, go deeper, and shine clearer. That is what draws them back. Not because they've necessarily changed, but because they start to realize that what you offered was rare. They chase the light, not knowing how to create it in themselves. They compare every encounter to the glow you carried. They remember the peace in your presence, the way you brought clarity to their confusion, how your voice calmed storms they didn't even talk about. And when the noise of the world grows loud and the counterfeits fade, they remember the light they once stood next to and now long for again. But light cannot be borrowed. It must be honored. It must be protected. And when it is not, it becomes a beacon that shines without apology, drawing attention not to who left, but to the glory of who remains. Separation is often misunderstood. It feels like abandonment, betrayal, or loss. But in the kingdom of God, separation is not always a punishment. Sometimes it's a strategy. There are things you cannot see clearly when you are emotionally entangled, when your heart is too close to the situation. Sometimes God allows a man to walk away, not to break you, but to reveal you, to show you who you truly are when the noise is gone and the distractions are removed. When someone walks away after wounding you, it leaves space. That space is sacred. It's in that emptiness where God speaks. It's in that quietness where you begin to hear heaven clearly, where you start to understand what you settled for, what you tolerated, and how much of yourself you were pouring into someone who did not see your worth. God doesn't remove people to cause pain. He removes people to cause clarity. Because sometimes we can't see the full weight of a person's influence on our lives until we're standing alone, until we're no longer carrying what was never ours to hold. Separation becomes the soil where revelation grows. You begin to see that what you called love was actually bondage. What you thought was loyalty was often one-sided. And what you excused as a season was actually a cycle. God uses distance to expose motives. He uses silence to magnify truth. And he allows separation not to highlight the absence of a man, but to highlight the presence of his hand. The man who left may believe he made the decision, but heaven allowed it because your purpose is too great to be bound by someone who cannot walk in agreement with your destiny. Separation opens your eyes not just to who they are, but to who you were never meant to become, trying to keep them. There is a vast difference between a divine assignment and human emotion, but many confuse the two. Emotion is powerful. It draws you in, makes you feel connected, invested, even destined. But emotion is not the same as purpose. It can be loud, convincing, and immediate, yet still disconnected from God's eternal plan for your life. Just because someone makes your heart race doesn't mean they were sent to walk with you in destiny. Human emotion attaches to moments. Divine assignments align with seasons and purpose. Often a man comes into your life and there is chemistry, connection, even love, but not covenant. God may allow him to pass through your story, but that doesn't mean he was meant to stay. Some people are not your life partners, they are your life lessons. But when your emotions override your discernment, you start trying to keep what heaven only permitted temporarily. You start building futures with people who were never graced to go with you to the next level. When those relationships collapse, or someone walks away after hurting you, the pain isn't just in the loss, it's in the confusion. Why did this happen? Didn't I feel peace? Didn't I pray? But purpose cannot be governed by feeling alone. That's why God separates divine alignment from emotional attachment. He allows the emotional high to break so the spiritual truth can rise. Because when your heart becomes entangled with someone who is never assigned to your destiny, you risk aborting the very purpose God placed in you. The man who hurt you may have stirred your heart, but that doesn't mean he was sent to cover it. Emotion told you he was the one, but revelation reveals he was only passing through. And once the assignment is complete, no amount of feeling can sustain what heaven has already concluded. Healing is not just a private journey, it becomes a public mirror. When you begin to rise from the pain, when you start reclaiming your identity, your peace, and your purpose, something powerful happens. The very person who hurt you begins to see the contrast between where you are and where they still remain. Your healing, your wholeness, your strength, it all becomes a reflection of everything they refuse to confront in themselves. A man who wounds you may expect you to stay broken, to remain in the emotional prison he has built. But when you begin to thrive, when you no longer respond the way you used to, when you don't need closure because God already gave you revelation, it disrupts his comfort. Your healing unsettles his dysfunction. It reminds him that you were never the problem, he was. And that truth, even when unspoken, becomes undeniable. The light of your transformation casts a shadow over his stagnation. You grow. He watches. You evolve. He regrets. You walk forward and he's stuck in the same cycles that led him to hurt you in the first place. Your healing exposes his immaturity, his fear, his inability to steward what was valuable. He starts to realize he mishandled a woman who didn't just survive him, she outgrew him. Sometimes they come back not because they love you, but because your healing reminds them of what they forfeited. They come back because your progress whispers truth to their pride. And truth has a way of shaking what denial tries to protect. But remember, your healing was never about revenge. It was about release. It was about becoming whole in the presence of God, so that your life becomes a testimony not just to others, but to the one who once believed you'd never rise again. So, hear me clearly. Just because they come back doesn't mean they belong. Not every return is a restoration. Some are tests sent to see if you've truly healed, or if you're still hungry for what once broke you. You are no longer who you were when they left. You've grown. You've been refined. You've been sanctified by pain, matured by silence, and anointed through your tears. Don't let temporary emotion reopen doors that God closed for your protection. You are not a resting place for the inconsistent. You are not a shelter for the unstable. You are a woman of destiny, crowned with purpose. carrying a glory that demands honor. Let the man who hurt you see the evidence of God's hand on your life, not through access, but through distance. Because when you finally understand your worth, you no longer negotiate with confusion. You no longer entertain what dishonored you. You no longer shrink to make others comfortable. Your healing isn't just survival. It's a declaration, I am not who you left. I am who God raised. And that truth is powerful enough to close every door that doesn't lead to purpose. Let them come back if they must. But let your boundaries speak before your heart does. Let your wisdom answer before your wounds do. And above all, let God's voice be louder than your memories. You are not a comeback story for someone else's ego. You are a living testimony of what God can do with a woman who refuses to stay broken.